Hey guys, how are you? I just want to quickly go through what we want to achieve. Remember, we've visually mind mapped some of the concepts that Locke is trying to present. Then we are going through, or we know that we're going through extracts to demonstrate his argument a bit more with nuance. We are trying to explore the point of individuation for a man and for a person. That's a really key point. We're still doing that at the moment. Again, we're looking at the POI of a person, and we want to explore issues related to the principle of individuation for a person as well. Okay, so that's what we're trying to achieve. We're going to read a bit more about the substance versus non-substantial part. The little finger argument that we're about to read, to me, was a bit confusing because I just didn't really fully process it. It took a few readings. So hopefully it's going to be quick for you. It'll be one quick logical argument. Usually what happens is when my understanding breaks down of reading a text, it's because I've missed one or two words. I'm just trying to read it quickly. So I'm going to try my best to make sure that I've been very clear and I've articulated a lot of things, all right? So we're going to read about self depending on consciousness, not substance. We're then going to read about the legal implications this definition of self may have, and then more about how to think about what the self is and what we should, what other issues are flagged, okay? So let's go. 17. Self depends on consciousness. Self is that conscious thinking thing, whatever the substance may be made out of. So for the purposes of this paragraph, we need to think that the self could be made or reside in any substance, all right? So it's sensible or conscious of pleasure and pain, capable of happiness or misery, and so is concerned for itself as far as that consciousness extends. And this is really important. That one of the best ways to define consciousness for him is to say it is the thing that is concerned for itself. So it's aware of itself, it presents itself to itself, and it's concerned about what itself is and what it's going to become. All right, take a note. Thus, everyone finds that, whilst comprehended under that consciousness, the little finger is as much part of himself as what it is, as what is most. So once this finger is actually attached to me, I'm conscious of it, it's part of my physical makeup, it's part of the center of my experience, and so I tend to therefore be concerned for it, all right? Upon separation of this little finger, should this consciousness go along with the little finger and leave the rest of the body, it is evident that the little finger would be the person, the same person, and self then would have nothing to do with the rest of the body. Now, what he's basically trying to say in his thought experiment is, if my consciousness resides in this substance, the substance of my little finger, chop it off, and it lives on, it goes to live on, right? But my consciousness resides in here, not my body, the rest of the memories and consciousness would only be concerned with my finger. Now, what confuses me about this was when he goes on to talk about the inseparable self. And some of you may go, oh, well, hang on, you've chopped off the body. Are you joining the finger back together? No, he's talking about psychological continuity. He's trying to say that what the self actually is a continuity of the memory and the way that the consciousness presented itself when I was in a full body versus the finger. Have a listen. Right? So, as in this case, it is the consciousness that goes along with the substance when one part is separate from the body, which makes the same person. That can be so confused, and constitutes the inseparable self. So, it is in reference to substances remote in time. So, in other words, right, this is really important. It's not the physical man that is the same self. Cut off the finger, consciousness remains here, but it had consciousness once of being in the full body versus consciousness now of only being in the same finger. But it's consciousness over both states, right? Do you get what I mean? Time to take a note. So this is what he means when he says consciousness joins itself. It's joining itself from here in my finger to the awareness and the consciousness that existed in my body, all right? So that's that with which the consciousness of this present thinking thing can join itself makes the same person and is one self with it and with nothing else, and so attributes to itself and owns all the actions of that thing as its own, as far as that consciousness reaches and no further, as everyone who reflects will perceive. So, he's asking you to think about my little thought experiment. The psychological continuity about being part of my whole body versus consciousness just being in my finger makes a lot of sense if we could accept the thought experiment of cutting off my finger and consciousness therefore existing only in my finger henceforth. Alright, time to take a note. Now let's explore some moral complications. What is basically said, and this is probably the best formula I could write down for explaining psychological continuity. The psychological continuity is what happens when consciousness, which can be described as the thing that is concerned for itself, it's aware of itself and concerned for itself, has a memory of presenting itself to itself across the same kind of, across time, alright? Across time. So it could be in one body, it could be in another body, it could be in my whole body and then my little finger. But the joining of the self is created through that continuity of being aware that whilst in this body I had one set of memories of presenting myself to myself, and that same consciousness did the same thing in my finger. Alright, take a note. Now let's look at some moral definitions and some moral implications, okay? Objects of reward and punishment. In this, personal identity is founded all the right and justice of reward and punishment, happiness and misery being that for which everyone is concerned for himself. So in other words, we can think about reward and punishment based on the fact that because consciousness is concerned for itself, right, people are going to act accordingly, right? And not mattering what becomes of any substance not joined to or affected with that consciousness. For as it is evident in the instance I gave but now, if the consciousness went along with the little finger when it was cut off, that would be the same self which occurred for the whole body yesterday. That's my point that we we're trying to make before. As making part of itself, whose actions then it cannot but admit as its own now. So the little finger has to acknowledge that it was or it is what it did yesterday when it was part of the whole body. Okay? Although if the same body should live and immediately from the separation of the little finger have its own peculiar consciousness, whereof the little finger knew nothing, it would not at all be concerned for it as part of itself, or could own any of its actions, or have any of them imputed upon him. So it can't attribute responsibility. So if the same body should still live, and immediately from the separation of the little finger have its own consciousness, what my body does after the finger is separated, and is going to mean that I will therefore be responsible for it as a body, and my finger will be responsible for what it did as a finger. But before the separation, we're both responsible for the same thing. Okay? So what he's basically doing is thinking about how we use the idea of psychological continuity and self equals psychological continuity, as a way of defining responsibility. Take a note. So, this may show us wherein personal identity consists not in the identity of substance. So he's saying, personal identity is not in the knowing of what substance is. Personal identity is not in substance, right? Take a note. But, as I have said, in the identity of consciousness. In other words, if you want to know what personal identity is, right, you need to be able to define consciousness. Right? Now, as far as we've read so far, consciousness could be in the soul, it could be in the body. It doesn't matter where it is, it could be there. But, the soul and the body, or the immaterial spirit, or whatever is carrying consciousness, is not what the self is. The self is the consciousness that, is part of that, or has emerged out of that, right? So wherein if Socrates and the present mayor of Queensborough agree, they are the same person. So there you go, he's just basically ousted the mayor of Queensborough, who thinks he's the reincarnation of Socrates. If the same Socrates waking and sleeping do not partake in the same consciousness, Socrates waking and sleeping is not the same person, of course. And to punish Socrates waking for what sleeping Socrates thought, and waking Socrates was never conscious of, would be no more right than to punish one twin for what his brother did, whereof he knew nothing, because their outsides were so alike that they could not be distinguished, for such twins have ever been seen. So let's go back to the Mayor of Queensbury who thought that he was Socrates, and let's think about Socrates being awake and asleep. And let's say when Socrates thinks something when he's awake, he forgets what he thought of when he was asleep, and vice versa. And let's say he did something when asleep, like sleepwalking, and he hurt somebody. As he's awake, because he had no memory of it, he would not be responsible for it. He'd have a different psychological continuity, all right? And that's what he's basically saying. We can't actually say that hold someone responsible for something that they did when they were a different self. Yeah? Take a note. But yet possibly it will still be objected. Suppose wholly to lose the memory of some parts of my life. So now he's really getting into a moral exposition here, okay? Beyond possibility of retrieving them, so that perhaps I shall never be conscious of them again. So what if I lose parts of my life? This is like the Nazi war criminal who has dementia. So obviously he says right here, yet I am not the same person that did those actions, had those thoughts that I once was conscious of, though I have now forgot them. So, he's saying, yet am I not, right? Yet am I not the same person that did those actions, had those thoughts that I once was conscious of, though I have now forgot them? To which I answer that we must here take notice of what the word I is applied to. So he's saying, if I'm going to answer this question, say I'm the same person, the young war criminal versus the old man with dementia, I now need to consider what I use the word I with and apply to, which in this case is man only. So in the case of holding someone responsible for a crime he committed in the past which he forgets, the I, the person committing the act, should be considered as a man, not a person. Take a note. And the same man being presumed to be the same person, I is easily here supposed to stand for the same person. But it be possible for the same man to have distinct, incommunicable consciousness at different times. It is past doubt that the same man would at different times make different persons. So what he's saying is that if you forget something you did when you were a young man, obviously there could be a case where the same body, the same continuation of the man, is actually in different persons because your psychological continuity is interrupted, all right, or it's started again, those kind of things. Take a note. Which we see is the sense of mankind in the solemnest declaration of their opinions. Human laws not punishing the madman for the sober man's actions, nor the sober man for what the madman did, thereby making them two persons, which is somewhat explained by our way of speaking in English when we say such and one is not himself or is beside himself. So we actually acknowledge that people aren't the selves we know them to be when we look at what they do. In which phrases is insinuated as if those who now, or at least first used them, thought that the self was changed, the self-same person was no longer in that man. So what he's saying is that the self can change in the man. So what do we do? What do we do? Now, we know from our prior reading and from our prior knowledge that he says the law must punish the man, not the person. And he's kind of acknowledged that different persons can exist in the same man because of psychological continuity being interrupted, or it being, what's the word I'm looking for? Or it just starts again from another point after you've lost certain memories. Now, I think it might actually be worthwhile for me to read 22 because that might help us actually explore what he's really saying. I know it will add to the video, but it will help. Alright, so let's quickly read it. And here he goes. This is basically the big thought experiment. But is not a drunk man and a sober man the same person? Alright, so, okay. We've acknowledged that different persons could exist in the same man because we have different psychological continuities occurring due to interruption or due to just fresh starts. So, should we ask the question, right, is not a drunk man and a sober man the same person? Obviously not. And we're going to see why. Why else is he punished for the fact that he commits when drunk, though he never be afterwards conscious of it? Just as much as the same person as a man that walks and does other things in his sleep is the same person and is answerable for any mischief he shall do in it. Human laws punish both. So human laws are meant to punish man and person. That's what he's saying at the moment, with a justice suitable to their own way of knowledge, because in the sense that they cannot distinguish certainly what is real or what is counterfeit or what's made up. So in other words, if a person says, I wasn't myself at the time, I was drunk, I wasn't aware, the human law has to kind of make a punishment of, A, you're a person, because that's what allows you to be morally culpable, like have to punish like the consciousness that made the decision. But it's not able to know that you were lying at the time and that you may have a different psychological continuity and be a different person, or that perhaps you were lying and bang, you're actually still the same person. So you're supposed to punish the person and the man. But let's keep reading. Take a note, by the way. Take a note. And so the ignorance in drunkenness or sleep is not admitted as a plea, so you can't see it. For though punishment to be next to personality and personality to consciousness, and the drunkard person be not conscious of what he did, yet human jurors justly punish him, because the fact is proved against him, but want of consciousness cannot be proved for him. In other words, the fact that I lacked my proper consciousness can never be proved, but I can easily prove the fact. So we've got to make our legal decision based on the facts. Take a note. But in the great day wherein the secrets of all hearts shall be laid open, it may be reasonable to think no one shall be made to answer for what he knows nothing of, but I shall receive his doom, his conscience accusing him or excusing him. So really, this is what we mean about, because it's impossible to know the internal state of someone, to know if they have a different psychological continuity or that it was interrupted. It's extremely important. It's extremely important then to punish the man, because that's the only thing that you can really make a judgment on is fact and evidence. So make a judgment on the fact and evidence, and you've got to punish the man. And in a way, you don't really punish the person, but you do. But you punish the person that you could assume committed the act. I don't know, it's hard to explain. You're supposed to take into account the person because that's what allows you to attribute responsibility to them. But you can't know the internal state of that person. So therefore, you judge on the facts and try to make a reasonable presumption that at the time of the act, this is what the person did, but you're punishing really that person that did it before if there was an interruption. If not, you're still punishing the same person. Take a note. Alright, I'm just going to go through chapter 6 in a separate video. Paragraph 26 in a separate video, and then we're done.